until all the fuss that came as the vote came up, that this was about expenses, you know, that some of the press saw this as being purely about expenses. And the Speaker actually said at the time, it was Michael Martin, he said, no, we guarantee that we will publish details of MPs' expenses. We guarantee that. This has nothing to do with that. But the press, as usual, blocked its ears, and I was on a roll of dishonour the next day. But I still believe I had it right.
Mm-hmm. And, I mean, because when eventually it all came out, you were actually
I had a halo.
Yes, you did. Yes, they all said you were a saint compared with many.
Again, the period of time that they published my expenses were in my last years in Parliament. Now, when you're heading towards your last years in Parliament, you know, the mortgage on your house, if it's there at all, is very small. And as it happened, I'd sold mine in preparation for retirement. If you're travelling like I do to Maidstone, well, I'm obviously not going to clock up the travel expenses that, say, Charlie Kennedy would do, going to Highlands and Islands, you know, and come on. And you get all these quite meaningless comparisons and halos or daggers, and sometimes they mean absolutely nothing.
But I guess at the same time, because of your convictions, you were as honest as you could be.
Oh, I stuck rigidly, not only to the letter, but to the spirit of the rules. And every single claim I made was within the rules, and I would always remove from a claim anything. I wouldn't just give them the claim and say, you sort it out. I would remove from it anything that I thought shouldn't be claimed. So, yes, I did that. But then so did an awful lot of MPs. Right. So actually did the majority of MPs. Mm. Even after all that scandal had shaken down, the majority of us were untouched. Mm.
How do you see Europe? Do you see it as something that is coming in and taking away the authority from Parliament and maybe bringing in some of the anti-Christian things it is? How do you view Europe in today's politics?
I don't blame it for the anti-Christian stuff, but I do think that Europe is over-intervening. Now, if you ask me, do I want to come out of Europe? I always say, look, I'm persuadable, but certainly not persuaded, because my first question is, not what are we coming from? I know that. You know, I'd quite like to come from it as well. What are we going to? That's what I want to know. Nobody's telling me. When we were negotiating to go into Europe in the mid-60s, we were in a vastly different position. We still had a bit of an empire. We had a hugely active Commonwealth. We had trade agreements such as EFTA with the Scandinavian countries. Britain was in a major position in the world. I mean, our word carried enormous weight. Contrast all of that with where we are today and tell me, when we've left the trading bloc, when we've come out, what exactly are the agreements that we're going to have which will replace it? How are we going to get the inward investment if we're not part of the bloc? You know, come on, tell me these things, please, because there are two ways of divorcing. One is you say, look, with great regret, I'm leaving, and you plan in advance. The other is you say, I've had enough, and you flounce out. Well, we all know which one works. You plan your life in advance. And unless somebody can tell me what we're coming to, this is a challenge I continually throw out to the let's come outers. I say, yeah. But I don't even want a referendum on it until you tell me what the option is. And I don't want to be told, oh, we can easily manage, because actually we can't. So I want to know.
But do you see if Europe continues the way it's going, and as you say, we don't come out, and it continues the way it's going, do you see that the authority of the British Parliament will actually become less and less, and more will be decided in Europe?
Well, that is already happening. That is a process which we don't need to discuss in theoretical terms, because it's already with us in practical terms. Indeed, you had a very senior judge saying the other day that European law does override British law. So, you know, we're already there, and I don't like it, and I'd quite like to come out of it, but not until I know what I'm coming to.
Yeah.
I mean, to try and lead the nation from something without being able to tell the nation where its destination actually lies seems to me the worst sort of leadership. And that's why it's not on offer from any of the major parties, because it would just be irresponsible.
Looking back over your career in Parliament, do you have a sort of a high watermark and a low watermark? Something you really, yes, I'm glad I did that, and, well, I wish I hadn't have done that.
Oh, I'm glad I've done lots of things in Parliament, both in front bench capacity and in a constituency capacity, and huge number of things that I look back on give me satisfaction. Obviously, the single biggest mess I ever got into was after the drug speech at party conference in 2000. I don't repent the policy at all. And the interesting thing is that by the back door, that policy actually not accompanied by zero tolerance, but the policy of fining people for drugs possession did then actually come in.
Mm. And a high point, is there any one that you think, really, that was terrific that we were able to do that, or I was involved in that?
Well, I think actually one of my best moments came not in any front bench capacity, despite the fact that I was involved in very big decisions like, for example, equalising state pension age between men and women. But it actually came in a constituency capacity when I got one of my constituents out of jail in Morocco, by which I mean I got him released. I didn't spring him from jail in Morocco. But by the time his wife came to see me, he'd been convicted, he'd been sentenced, he'd lost his appeal, and he was facing 9 years in a Moroccan jail for a crime that not even the Moroccans really believed he'd committed. And when his wife came to see me, I thought, yeah, what am I supposed to do about this? I can't intervene in the system of justice in this country, never mind somebody else's. So I went through all the usual diplomatic routes, which got me exactly where I expected to get, which was nowhere. And then as the last throw of a dice that I was convinced was irretrievably loaded against me, I went out to Rabat and saw a host of Moroccan ministers. And to cut a very, very long story short, 18 months into that 9-year sentence, I was able to phone his wife up and say, John's out, he's with the ambassador, he'll be home in 48 hours. And her reaction, when she finally took in what I was saying, told me why it was I'd become a member of Parliament. Mm-hmm.
But probably those times were few and far between for you in many ways.
Oh, I think everybody can, or at any rate most MPs in all parties and both sides of the House, can point to such moments when because they were where they were and did what they did. Even if it seemed very cranky to everybody else, and people thought I was mad to be going out to Rabat, what a lot, particularly as I couldn't even claim to travel out. They thought I was absolutely mad. But because they did that, they didn't make a drop of difference to the nation. They didn't make a trickle of difference to the constituency. But they made a tidal wave of difference to an individual family. Mm-hmm. And that's a very big part of the job. Mm.
I guess we forget that, Owen, because we look upon MPs as they're leading the country, as you say, and making decisions, which maybe they don't always do, but they're part and parcel of it. But I guess we forget that you are also representing X number of individual constituents that can come and see you on all sorts of things.
And they do.
And they do. How do you cope with so many problems like that?
That side of the job grew enormously while I was there. Older members, when I first got in, so I got in 87, and older members who'd been there pre-war sometimes, but certainly from the 50s, would tell us that they could remember doing their letters in the afternoon in the library by hand. Well, by now, and particularly with the invention of the email, MPs are getting thousands and thousands and thousands of letters, and no way could you sit down by the fire after lunch, and sort of do them by hand in the library. It doesn't work like that anymore. And the growth of casework is one of the reasons why MP staff have grown. When I first went there, I had one secretary who shared an office with about 9 secretaries. I shared an office with 3 other MPs. And now, pretty well, every MP has 2 or 3. If they're inner city MPs, maybe more, 2 or 3 members of staff. They will have a constituency office. They will have an office to themselves in the House of Commons. And it is all because of the huge expansion of the constituency workload, which is vast. I mean, no way now could I do it on one secretary. Indeed, in those days, some, particularly the older members, actually shared secretaries. And by the time I left, I had a full-time member of staff in the constituency doing nothing but casework. I had a full-time secretary in the House. I had an overflow secretary who dealt with the overflow from both offices. and an intern full-time. And I couldn't have managed on any less. And despite all of that, we occasionally had to get in a bit of extra help.
I mean, I think sometimes the feeling is that MPs don't care as much for their constituencies.
Oh, come on.
Yes, I was going to ask you, I mean, is that a myth? I mean, are the majority really caring for them?
As in every profession, you'll get a few idlers. But for the most part, MPs care passionately for justice, for what happens to their constituents. They will take up cases, they will pursue those cases with enormous vigour. They'll raise debates in the House on individual constituents. MPs do actually care. But again, your profession is just trying to give a completely contrary view to the public. And I think the public believe that we're work shy, that we're sleazy, and that actually we don't understand modern life.
And that's not true. You're on the record as saying that's not true.
I'm on the record as saying that for the overwhelming majority of MPs in all parties and across the House, that is just so much old rubbish.
Great. And I have to say, you mentioned our profession on a number of occasions. There's an awful lot of different people within our profession as well. And there are some that really do care too. We've got just a couple of minutes left, Anne. Really appreciated you sharing your life and your thinking, etc., with us today. I've certainly found it very, very fascinating. Sort of a mythical question to end with, but if you'd ever had become Prime Minister...
Oh, rather. I wish, yeah.
But, yeah, big if. That's why I say it's a mythical question. What would you have done differently? What change would you have really loved to have seen come in the
Zero tolerance
country?
on law and order, a la Giuliani, which I think worked brilliantly in New York and could work if it was done properly here. You couldn't introduce it overnight because we simply haven't got the numbers of police, but you could move towards that. I would have completely rejigged the NHS, not so much structurally, but in terms of breaking down the Berlin Wall between the private sector and the public sector, and expecting people who could to take more responsibility for their own health, encouraging private insurance, simply because the NHS cannot do everything. This is the great myth, that it can somehow do everything on demand. It can't. And therefore, those who can pay for themselves jolly well should try and do that.
There's our music, Anne. Thank you so much for coming today. Really enjoyed it. Trust you've enjoyed it as much as I have done. Join us again very soon for another interview. Bye for now.